Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Lampman, the Director of Offshore Wind at NYSERDA. We're pleased to have an opportunity here today to host this webinar and introduce New York's 3 new offshore wind projects selected through our latest solicitation a little earlier this year. Before we get started, I'd just like to note that attendees have been muted upon entering this webinar, but we are going to be saving a little bit of time at the end for questions. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature of the app. And if it is directed to a specific developer, please note that developer's name at the beginning of the question. Get the next slide, please. So before we get started with the introduction of our 3 new developers, we'll give a little bit of a background of New York's role in offshore wind energy development. We'll take a little bit of time to explain NYSERDA's 3rd solicitation that resulted in these projects, and then we'll turn it over to each of the developer project teams to talk briefly about their individual projects. Finally, as I mentioned, we'll be saving a little bit of time to take questions and answers for these developers at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. So to start, New York's offshore wind program is predicated on the New York Climate Act. And as you can see here, the Climate Act is broken into a series of goals between 2025 and 2050. The ones that we're very focused on in the space of offshore wind is really hitting a 70% renewable energy in our electrical grid by 2030, and then specifically for offshore wind, a target of 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Next slide, please. In achieving these goals, NYSERDA has been serving as the lead for offshore wind energy development in New York, but we don't do it alone. We work with our sister agencies across New York as well as the federal agencies to help accomplish this goal. The abbreviations on this slide are NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. DOS is the Department of State. DEC is the Department of Environmental Conservation. DPS is the Department of Public Service. DOT is the New York State Department of Transportation. ESD is Empire State Development. And State Historic Preservation Office is out of the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. This is just some of the state agencies who are involved in offshore wind. There are others. The Department of Labor, for example, works on issues associated with labor. New York State Power Authority and the Long Island Power Authority also have roles to play. But in a short list, this is the group that we work with a lot. So one of the major roles for New York, and the reason that we are the hub of the work for New York, is that we are the buyer of long-term revenues for offshore wind renewable energy certificates, or ORECs, and I'll talk a little more about what they are, but it is the incentive that the state provides to offshore wind energy developers to build their projects. In New York, we do not have a state energy office, but NYSERDA serves that function to a degree, working on energy policy and strategy development and achieving long-term energy goals across the state. We do this in close coordination with the Department of Public Service, the Public Service Commission, the New York ISO, and others. We also are working to advance a supply chain and a workforce of New Yorkers to support the advancement of our offshore wind projects in New York. We do this in close coordination with Department of Labor, but also with the Empire State Development, who likewise has an interest in developing economic opportunities for New York State. NYSERDA works in the space of research and analysis relating to offshore wind, looking for ways to identify and reduce the risk of these projects on the ecosystems and people of New York. Similarly, the Department of Environmental Conservation works with marine resources and tries to understand implications there. Department of State similarly works on issues associated with maritime and the interaction between federal and state authorities. So we engage with both of those agencies and others on those. We're all involved in stakeholder engagement and trying to recognize and demonstrate and explain the value of offshore wind energy and renewable energy generally to New York State stakeholders, as well as those regionally. The agencies in New York have particular jurisdiction over the state permitting processes. This includes the offshore wind projects themselves as they relate to state waters and state lands, but also in the regulatory processes associated with the offshore space and the jurisdictions that New York has in federal waters as well. And New York obviously coordinates very closely with our federal partners at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who issues the leases for our offshore wind projects, but also with many other state or federal agencies, including National Marine Fisheries and others, to make sure that these projects advance in a way that is responsible to our ecosystems and our people. Next slide, please. So the authorization that NYSERDA has to run these solicitations for ORECs is provided via the Public Service Commission in their orders. So far, New York has issued 3 solicitations, one in 2018, one in 2020, one in 22, and we were preparing to release our 4th solicitation later this month. But these solicitations are to procure ORECs, and I'll explain more in the next slide, please. A very simple way of explaining what an OREC is illustrated in the figure on the right. So NYSERDA is procuring offshore wind projects under a evaluation process set forth by the Public Service Commission. That evaluation process is 70% based on price, 20% based on the economic benefits that those projects will deliver to New Yorkers, and 10% on the project viability, the ability of that project to move forward efficiently. The 70% price is really predicated on an OREC index strike price. So we're looking at a strike price is really the price that the developers bid to us and receive 70% of the value in the evaluation process. That strike price is comprised of 3 major pieces. 2 of those pieces are market-based. That's the market capacity price and the market energy prices. These are the prices that all generators in New York receive through their interconnection point as regulated by the New York State Independent Systems Operator. But the difference between what they receive in the market and the strike price bid to NYSERDA is the OREC strike price. If the value of the energy to the market goes up, then our strike price goes down, as illustrated on the bar on the right. And if the price of energy and the capacity prices go down, the OREC price goes up. This provides a stabilizing addition to the prices of energy in New York over the fixed term, 25-year fixed term of these contracts. So it does provide a nice stabilizing force in the long term that doesn't see the same volatility that we see in the fossil fuels markets. The ORECs are purchased by NYSERDA, and that's our commitment to the developers in our contracting process, that we will buy the ORECs from them, which will relate to these OREC strike prices. The utilities and other load-serving entities purchase those ORECs from NYSERDA in proportion to their energy use. And the cost of the ORECs through that mechanism are passed on to electric customers across the state. And again, this provides a stabilizing function on the energy markets across New York. Get the next slide, please. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Leila El-Ashmawi, who will talk a little more about the conditions and the stipulations associated with the 3rd solicitation. Leila?
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to be with us and learn about offshore wind in New York. So with Greg's framing of how OREC procurements work programmatically, I'm going to fill in some further context about the 3rd offshore wind solicitation specifically. So each solicitation is an evolution to our program, uniquely designed for the market conditions, laws, and policy objectives needed in that moment, with the goal to elicit the most interest and response from the developers. So the 3rd offshore wind solicitation gathered a lot of momentum following the Boehm lease auction and Governor Hochul's first State of the State address. It included a target of at least 2 gigawatts of offshore wind. It included a supply chain investment plan component to distribute the first installment of $500 million given by Governor Hochul in that first State of the State address. This $500 million is meant to support offshore wind supply chain in New York. The third offshore wind solicitation also pushed forward in terms of transmission. So it required a first of its kind meshed ready design for offshore substations. The RFP also prioritized repurposing fossil fuels and new grid technologies such as energy storage. The RFP further included priority areas and contractual provisions to support labor, stakeholder engagement, environmental stewardship, ensure that benefits are delivered to disadvantaged communities, And there really was a lot of consideration in the economic benefits for commitments to minority and women-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, and also included requirements to support U.S. iron and steel. So the RFP sought to offer various strategies for de-risking and also included alternate pricing schemes that contemplate one-time adjustments for inflation or for interconnection. So this RFP sought some novel and ambitious approaches and included many novel and ambitious key provisions itself, as summarized here. Next slide, please. So there has certainly been some build-up to this webinar. The third offshore wind solicitation was launched in July of 2022. The proposals were received by NYSERDA on January 26th, 2023. And all of those proposals included supply chain investment plans, and all of the proposals met various other eligibility criteria. They underwent rigorous evaluation. Scores were based 70% on price and 30% on non-price, as Greg mentioned. So following this whole process and scoring and evaluation, awards were made just 1 month ago on October 24th, and we are currently finalizing contracts which are expected early next year. Next slide, please. So here we are summarizing the results received back in January. This has been the most competitive offshore wind solicitation to date in the US. We received proposals from 8 different projects from 6 different developers listed here. And these proposals were tremendous. They really delivered on all of the key provisions I mentioned a few slides ago, being very novel and ambitious. This collection of proposals included optionality such as risk-adjusted pricing, energy storage, various supply chain investment plans and facilities, etc. The response is really an enormous body of work, and for those of you that are curious, the solicitation page for OREC RFP 22-1 hosts all of this information, including public versions of those submissions. Next slide, please. So the results of the third offshore wind solicitation were announced about a month ago, as I mentioned, and include 3 awarded offshore wind projects and a supply chain investment plan for blades and nacelles manufacturing in New York. We have indeed these 3 projects here with us to share about their projects, and we're very excited. But before I hand the mic over for them to introduce themselves, I want to highlight the aggregate impact of this award group. The awarded capacity is enough to power nearly 2 million homes. The collection of projects bring economic development and an anticipated $15 billion of in-state spending, including over $3 billion of that to New York State disadvantaged communities and over $85 million to support various research and mitigation efforts. These 3 projects are Attentive Energy One for 1,404 megawatts, Community Offshore Wind for 1,314 megawatts, and Excelsior Wind for 1,314 megawatts. You can see them in the map here out at sea in the green. And with that, I will pass back over to Greg, I believe, to then introduce our guest speakers.
Thank you, Layla. Yeah, and if people have questions for the individual developers that will be presenting this afternoon, please use the Q&A function in the lower right. And again, if it's for a specific developer, please add their name at the beginning of the Q&A. So first up, we're going to have Attentive Energy speaking about their project, Attentive One. I'll turn it over to Attentive Energy to introduce, please.
Great. Greg, Layla, thank you so much. NYSERDA team, thank you so much for organizing us in this opportunity to present all of our opportunities here in front of you. I'm Damian Bednars. I'm the Managing Director for Attentive Energy One. We'll walk through a little bit about our project, what we're offering here for New York, and yeah, look forward to taking your questions. Next slide, please. So, Attentive Energy One, who are we? Attentive Energy One is made up of actually 3 companies. It is Total Energies, Rise Light and Power, and Corio. Total Energies is a global multi-energy company. It's really spearheading the energy transition at a massive level with a commitment of 100 gigawatts of renewables by 2030 alone. 4 gigawatts of offshore wind in the US in development right now. and just a true amount of global offshore experience that's been happening to date. We've also partnered with Rise Light and Power, which is a leading developer here locally in New York, taking on the massive opportunity of transforming one of the largest fossil energy plants in New York City with Ravenswood Generating Facility, which we'll hear more about in a couple slides on what that opportunity brings, as well as Corio Generation, which is a pure offshore wind player with probably the largest pipeline of offshore wind development globally with 30 gigawatts in its pipeline. Next slide, please. Some of the details. So we are leased area 538. We're successful in the 2021 auction. We have a 1404 nameplate capacity that's going into New York based on the third solicitation here. You'll hear even more about our interconnection point and our landing at Ravenswood Generating Station there in Western Queens. Our distance, we're about 50 miles south of Jones Beach. And we are operating with the goals of completing a number of our both federal and state permitting efforts through 2026 and construction to begin at the end of 2029. Next slide, please. We've heard it before, and it's even more important than ever, stakeholder engagement. This is an area that we're very, very passionate about and something we've been committed to for a great deal of time. For over 4 years, this team and these partners have been really dedicated to creating a two-way dialogue, really across New York. That means everything that's going on in the city, Long Island, upstate, and really understanding kind of what is needed. What are the gaps? Where can we actually support the future development? What are the pathways that need to be created? And so just kind of clockwise around this image here, and you see just kind of the areas we've been engaged on. This is the coalition. This is the coalition that is responsible for making offshore wind a success in New York, partnering with academic entities like LaGuardia to create true training centers and create those workforce pathways going forward. It doesn't just start in college. It doesn't just start with the trades. It starts much, much sooner. We've been successfully engaging pilot programs and supporting through our community engagement, as well as future community investment initiatives that you hear about, like the student day we had at SUNY Maritime in the Bronx, really identifying opportunities and explaining what this opportunity will be in the years and decades ahead. It's critical that we're also working on identifying to localize and diversify the supply chain, making sure that we're bringing on this opportunity and identifying those pathways, and also trying to remove some of those hurdles for minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses to make sure that they're part of this success story as well. Labor. We're not going to do it without union labor. Discussions of obviously getting forward to PLA, Project Labor Agreement. There's a incredible team of Local 1-2 there at the Ravenswood Generating Facility that is a local union workforce. They'll be part of the energy transition. And also you'll hear more about that in the next slide. And of course, the community around us. It is very clear that we're in a disadvantaged community with the Ravenswood Generating Facility. We engage early with Rise Light and Power, as well as our efforts to make sure that that community has full view of what the opportunity is of transforming Ravenswood, but also making sure that we are addressing a lot of their major concerns as it relates to workforce, air pollution, and the like, that we can then bring forward with the historic opportunity that is offshore wind. And so let me turn it over to my colleague, Clint Plummer here, who's the CEO of Rise Light and Power, to tell a little more about what is the historic opportunity of transformation at Ravenswood Generating Facility. Clint?
Hey, thanks, Damien. And let me just pause before diving into the next slide and say thank you very much to Greg and Layla and the entire team at NYSERDA. On behalf of all the partners in Attentive Energy One, we just couldn't be more thrilled to be here today, and want to extend a really heartfelt thanks for the trust that NYSERDA and Doreen Harris and Governor Hochul have placed in us for delivering this major and very important project. If we go to the next slide, I want to create a little context for folks here. Offshore wind is a transformative technology. It's something that's going to radically transform how we generate and provide power to our largest coastal cities, New York being the epicenter of that. And I know this because my company owns and operates the largest fossil generating facility in New York City. It's the Ravenswood Generating Station, which you see pictured right here on this slide. Ravenswood sits on 27 acres on the waterfront of the East River in northwestern Queens, and it sits immediately opposite the largest public housing complex in all of North America. And so as owner of this facility, we're engaged with that community day in and day out, and we understand the challenges that this community faces. And that's why we've been so engaged in working to transform this large fossil generating facility into a hub for clean energy. And offshore wind is the way that we will affect that transformation. Attentive Energy One is the first of several offshore wind projects we intend to interconnect at the Ravenswood station, and it will catalyze a transformation not just for Ravenswood, but for the entire community around it. Attentive, as Damien mentioned, will be located 50 miles offshore, so far that standing on the beach at Jones Beach or in the Rockaways or at Coney Island, you won't be able to see the machines, the nacelles, even from standing at the beach. It's that far away. You also have the ability to bring power right into New York City, all the way submarine under the ocean floor, under the harbor, up the East River, and connect it right here at Ravenswood. And that will allow us to retire and replace a 400 megawatt fossil generating facility, one of the 4 generating units at Ravenswood today. And this, folks, is the type of transformation that offshore wind can unlock. Offshore wind, through Attentive Energy One, will directly cause the retirement and the replacement of a large fossil generating unit with renewable energy. And more than that, it'll create new jobs and a just transition for the existing workforce at Ravenswood, because we're not only going to interconnect the Attentive Energy project at the Ravenswood site, we're also going to use Ravenswood as the operations and maintenance hub for the project. That'll mean that we'll use the existing waterfront to bring in the large service and operations vessels that'll be necessary for ferrying crew members and spare parts and consumables to the offshore wind facilities. It'll be host to a warehouse and a control room and administrative offices and training facilities that will create opportunities for the existing workforce, the working women and men who are currently turning wrenches on big fossil generators, to get training and to transition to working on large-scale renewables like offshore wind right at this same site. And it'll also create opportunities for new jobs and new pathways for the community surrounding the Ravenswood site through innovative training efforts that we've kicked off with those partnerships that Damien mentioned. Let me just go to the next slide and talk about a couple of the benefits that Attentive Energy One will bring. First and foremost, as I mentioned, this project will lead to a historic replacement and retirement of a large fossil generating unit, which will catalyze positive change across this community through reductions in emissions, and at the same time catalyze a job creation opportunity for the existing workforce and for additional workers in and around the community to get training. Part of this project will lead to a significant amount of job creation and other investment in New York State. As Damien made reference to, we've made a commitment to buy the wind turbines for this project from a new manufacturing facility to be constructed by General Electric in the capital region. That, together with the work at Ravenswood and all the other commitments we're making as part of Attentive Energy One, will result in over $25 billion of benefits for New York State, 2,600 plus new, unique, full-time equivalent jobs over the life of the project in New York. This will include building out that permanent operations and maintenance hub, creating new jobs and just transition opportunities for the workforce at Ravenswood and the surrounding community. And in addition to that, we'll be making very significant investments in the community at Ravenswood and other communities around New York City and more broadly, New York State that will benefit these disadvantaged communities and create workforce opportunities for members of these communities who want to be part of the transition to renewable energy. So we're very excited about this. We, again, want to commend the leadership of Governor Hochul and Doreen Harris and the entire team at NYSERDA for their visionary leadership in being at the forefront of offshore wind, not just in the United States, but really globally with a major set of projects like this. And just again, want to extend our very deep gratitude for the trust that the state is placing in this. And I want to assure everybody listening here today that we are going to do everything in our power to deliver a project that every New Yorker can be proud of. Thank you very much. Damien?
Thanks, Clint. And just to wrap up with our last slide here, we want to hear from you. So you can find us a few ways. We're very active on social media, covering all the different areas we're engaged in. So feel free to reach us there. Go to our website, attentiveenergy.com/AE1. You can also find more information about the project there, and email us. And there's a contact us page or stop us on the street. Really, we're available. We want to create this two-way dialogue, so we make sure that we hear from you, and you can tell more about how you see the offshore wind industry benefiting you in the years ahead. So thank you all. We'll turn it back to Greg.
Thank you, Damien, and thank you, Clint, for your presentation. Before we go to the next presentation from Community Offshore Wind, I'll just let everyone know that this webinar will be available on the NYSERDA website in the next couple of days. So we're recording this, and the recording will be available. We'll be additionally posting the slides by themselves. So if you're interested, check back the website in a couple of days, and this will all be available. So next up is our partners at Community Offshore Wind to talk about their project. I'll turn it over to you guys, please.
Thanks, Greg. Just confirming you can see and hear me.
Sound great. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the NYSERDA team, and thanks to the 460 some odd participants today for your time. Allow me to introduce myself and the project. I am Doug Perkins. I am the president and project director for Community Offshore Wind. And if I could have the next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit about Community Offshore Wind. It is a joint venture project between RWE Renewables and National Grid Ventures. And it really brings together the combined expertise of two major energy companies with very significant experience in both offshore wind and transmission development. National Grid, very clearly a local expert, experience developing large-scale infrastructure, clean energy projects across the region. The parent company serves more than 20 million customers across the Northeast and has more than 5,000 employees in New York State already. And then RWE is one of the world's leading companies in offshore wind development, active across the entire project lifecycle, from the very early project origination through development, construction, as well as a long-term owner and operator of our offshore wind projects. The expertise the company has earned over the last 20 years has resulted in 19 offshore wind farms in operation, and now has over 6 gigawatts of lease area capacity in the US alone. The joint venture last year participated along with our colleagues at Attentive and Vineyard in the New York Bight lease auction, and we were successful in securing the largest of the leases on offer, lease area 539. And now we are both very excited, but also honored to be provisionally awarded a offtake contract to develop 1.3 gigawatts of new capacity for New York State. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little about the lease area and then our first project. So the lease area itself is over 125,000 acres. And we have internal estimates that the lease area holds over 3 gigawatts of new offshore wind capacity. It is located a little over 60 miles south of Long Island and about a little under 40 miles east of New Jersey. And importantly, our first selected project is going to be one of the first projects to connect to Con Edison's new Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, which will support the city's ongoing electrification efforts. And for further reference, the kind of cable route or the connection to shore is about 90 miles from our lease area in our first phase project to the Con Ed hub. As I mentioned, it's over 1.3 gigawatts of capacity in this award, which is enough to power over 500,000 homes. And importantly, in addition to the economic and the community benefits that our project will create, it'll also contribute up to a 5% reduction in emissions for New York's power sector, which is equivalent to taking millions and millions of cars off the road. And I think last point to hit on this slide is that our project and the projects of our colleagues here will be a very major step towards the state's goal of zero emission electricity system, while also reducing reliance on fossil fuels and improving air quality for millions of New Yorkers. Next slide, please. So while our project strives to have a net positive environmental impact, it's also essential, and it's a commitment for our projects that we empower and enrich the communities that we're working with. And we aim to do so through major investments in economic development, in job training, and also supportive services that workers need in order to pursue the more than 800 new good-paying jobs that our project will create. And so to that end, our stakeholder engagement plan is really built on 4 key pillars. And this is in an effort to increase the positive impacts to our communities, and doing so through encouraging feedback, promoting transparent and responsible development, and ensuring that we're investing in the local economies through innovative new initiatives. So of these elements, start with inclusive decision making. So it's pretty easy. Stakeholder engagement, as Damien mentioned, is essential and will be key to informing the design of both our project, but also our economic benefits programs. Second up, ensuring that there are tangible benefits for our communities. So as part of our project's first phase, we will invest up to $130 million in local dedicated projects for fisheries, environmental mitigation, economic, workforce development, and general community investments. As also as part of our proposal, we've committed to spend more than $500 million in expenditures and labor costs in disadvantaged communities, and ensuring that our benefits from this project and others reach the families, the workers, and the communities that need it the most. To that end, outreach will match our community's needs. So we'll meet our stakeholders where they are with a wide array of our outreach efforts, and we'll ensure that it's equitable and inclusive in the design of our economic benefits. And the last pillar will be transparent, and we'll be up to date in our tracking and our information sharing around the work that we're doing. So we are committed to working with community organizations from day one to ensure that there are transparent communications on all aspects of our project. We'll also be doing quarterly surveys. We'll host a live stakeholder dashboard on our website, and we'll be holding periodic focus groups to ensure that we're meeting every stakeholder's needs. Next slide, please. And so what have we done to date? I mean, we've very much been a part of our communities and engaged heavily with folks across the state since submitting our bid for the project, and quite frankly, since we secured the lease last year. Some of those efforts include donations of food, winter clothing to support families that are in need, helping with waterfront preservation and cleanup efforts. And we've also partnered with community organizations and educational institutions to expand access to STEM education, field trips, to really try and expose today's students to the jobs that they can pursue in the future, and I would say today's growing clean energy economy. Our economic development investments will help New York communities prepare their workforces for this, for the jobs today and the transition to tomorrow, and will help to break down those longstanding barriers that too often have prevented workers from pursuing these stable, good-paying jobs. One of the commitments I'd like to highlight to this end is our $10 million investment in reduced cost childcare services, which is available to all offshore wind workers and trainees in New York, even those that aren't going to be working on our project. And to deliver this investment, we partnered with the United Way of New York to design and create this program because we felt that it was critical that we ensured that no worker or family would be left behind with this opportunity for the clean energy transition. We also did so to build on the fantastic work from Governor Hochul's administration to expand access to childcare in New York State. And we will make it possible to ensure working parents have the opportunity to pursue new educational opportunities and employment on an equal footing. And then outside of our direct investments, we're also taking steps to ensure our project is developed as responsibly and as transparently as possible. One example is that Community Offshore Wind is the first offshore wind developer to sign a cooperative research and development agreement, a CRADA, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And what this partnership really does, it sets a new industry standard, first and foremost, but it would really help development by allowing the federal experts to have early input in the planning of our environmental monitoring around offshore wind development regionally. And so that will help by increasing transparency between the researchers and the developer community. And we think that this integrated approach will help improve the overall quality of the data collected, but also provide for more informed decision-making and sustainable management of our marine resources. Next slide, please. And then just going to close, I think Damien hit it as well. We are very active in social as well as in-person communities at multiple events around the state. But please do reach out. I'd say thank you for joining this event to learn a little bit about the project. Thanks again to the NYSERDA team for inviting us here to share more about what we're planning to do and what we're doing already. But I would encourage anyone that if you have questions about our project, if you want to learn more about our specific programs or community investments, please do visit our website and feel free to reach out through social or through our general contact information shown here. And with that, I'll just say thank you for everyone's time today and hand it back to you, Greg and Layla.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate it. That was a great overview. A reminder for everyone, we have some questions coming in. Appreciate it. If you have more questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Last developer presenting today is going to be Vineyard Offshore Wind. They'll be talking about their Excelsior Wind project. And with that, I will turn it over to the Vineyard team.
All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you to NYSERDA for having us here today for the opportunity to share this project with you. Greg, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, sorry. My name is Norda Dotney, and I am the Development Director for Excelsior Wind, and which is being developed here by Vineyard Offshore. So who we are, next slide. Who we are, Vineyard Offshore is a US-based developer of offshore wind projects. We led the development of Vineyard Wind, which is the first commercial scale offshore wind project in the US for Massachusetts. Vineyard Wind is an 800 megawatt project that is a joint venture of CIP with Avangrid. It is currently under construction and expected to deliver first power by the end of the year. Through Vineyard Wind, Vineyard Offshore spearheaded a collaborative approach to working with communities, fishermen, and other constituencies, resulting in widespread support for the project and for offshore wind in general. We, Vineyard Offshore, are the exclusive US offshore wind developer for CIP, which is Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. CIP is one of the largest dedicated clean energy investment funds in the world, with over 26 billion in assets under management. This capital is entirely devoted to clean energy investments. Through our relationship with CIP, Vineyard Offshore is able to bring global experience in more mature offshore markets to the US. Independently from our Vineyard Wind JV, Vineyard Offshore is developing 3 lease areas for CIP: the Excelsior Wind project in New York, and in addition, a lease area off the southeastern coast of New England, and 1 additional acreage in California. These 3 lease areas have more than 6 gigawatts of potential capacity for development. Next slide, please. The Excelsior Wind project will bring 1,314 megawatts to the state of New York from the 544 lease area. Fire Island is the closest shore point at 24 miles away, and 544 is 31 miles south of Jones Beach. It will power approximately 700,000 homes and reduce CO2 emissions by 1.1 million metric tons annually. It will be the equivalent of taking 225,000 cars off the road. Excelsior Wind will have a point of interconnection at East Garden City and Uniondale. The landfall location and onshore route are not yet determined, but we are evaluating a range of options to arrive at East Garden City, and we're focusing on community engagement in the process. Now I will hand it over to Marlena Fitzpatrick to discuss stakeholder engagement and the benefits for the community.
Hi everyone, Marlena Fitzpatrick Garcia. I'm here in New York, and I am the Workforce Development Manager for Vineyard Offshore. So next slide, please. All right, so here at Vineyard Offshore, we employ a community-led approach to workforce development and stakeholder engagement in support of a just transition centered on racial justice and equity and economic development opportunities for New Yorkers like myself. Disadvantaged communities are at the forefront of our efforts to support local businesses, create union jobs and long-term careers, and promote the environmental benefits of clean energy. To achieve this, we partner and collaborate with stakeholders that foster a just transition and are driven by diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. This includes tribal engagement, higher education, labor unions, community-based organizations, kids and youth education and organizations, and environmental institutions, among others. Next slide, please. Our New York team is mapping out the workforce development and higher plan for New York that honors those commitments to our communities. The commitments include over 1,200 jobs, $4 billion in investments, $45 million for workforce, fisheries, and environmental and community initiatives, and funding educational scholarships and wraparound services that would bridge the gaps in communities' needs so we can have a robust workforce and to turn New Yorkers in leaders in offshore wind. We are here to foster and become leaders of the offshore wind, and we are committed to doing so by leading top down and bottom up, grassroots, getting into the communities and listening. Active listening is very important. So we want to thank you for listening, for coming here. Thank you, NYSERDA. And we want to really hear from you. Next slide, please. We really want to hear from you. My name is Marlena Fitzpatrick, and you can email us. You can follow us on social media. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norda and Marlena. Appreciate the overview. Get the next slide, please. Okay, so we now have an opportunity to turn to some of the questions that have come in. So we've had a number of them that are what I'll call general to each of the three developers that presented today. So if you could, I will start with, we'll go through the same order that we're presenting. So we'll start with Attentive and then Community and then Vineyard. But the first question is, folks would like a little more insight into what your schedule is for site assessment, project design, permitting, and COD for each of the projects. So if you could speak to those, and then also note whether your configuration is going to be HVAC, HVDC, and if HVDC, what you're thinking around the converter stations are. So again, a little more about the site assessment, timeline, project design, permitting, and COD, and then a little on the HVAC versus or HVDC configurations associated with your project. So can we start with the Attentive team, please?
Thanks, Greg, and thank you all for submitting questions. I'll treat it like a lightning round because we'll get to everybody. So our SAP has been submitted. We're actively working towards submitting our COP for next year. We are also moving forward and actually submitted our Article 7, the state permitting process, which is probably further questions on that. And we are using HVDC to reach our objectives to have construction in 29.
And what's the thinking around the converter station for the HVDC configuration?
Yeah, so that was a point where Clint identified on the diagram there in one of our slides showing the converter station to be developed there on site at Ravenswood Generating Facility.
Great, thanks, Damien. And do you happen to have the case number for the Article 7 process?
I don't off the top of my head, but we can provide it. Clint, I don't know if you're available, if you have anything handy.
I'll get it for you in a minute and I'll put it into the chat.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, same question to the community team, a little about your site assessment, project design timelines, permitting, COD, and then also HVDC configuration.
Yep. So I'd say very similar to what Damien just mentioned. So our site assessment's well underway, also with a plan to submit our COP next year. The project will use HVDC. Yes, it will require a converter station, which will be sited in Brooklyn, near to the point of interconnection location we're working through. And we'll be doing that in conjunction with the communities. And that would include the routing, the actual siting, and working through the Article 7 process.
Okay, and do you guys have an Article 7 number yet?
I will have to check with the team. I don't know it offhand.
Okay, yeah, they're hard to remember. Great, thank you. And same question over to the Vineyard team.
All right, hi. So very similar to the other developers, we have already submitted our SAP. We are looking to submit our COP in early next year. We are an HVAC project, and we're looking at a COD in the 2030-2031 timeframe.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry, and we have not yet submitted our Article 7 application.
Okay. And HVAC configuration?
HVAC, yes.
Okay. And there was a question also about thinking about cable fall. So obviously you're going to East Garden City. Is there anything you can say about the current thinking around cable fall?
Yeah, we're evaluating a lot of options in the area. So we're very centered on the Nassau County area, but we really have not decided what a primary route is. We're very focused on external stakeholder engagement in order to try to help us determine what the best possible route is. Great. Now that we know that we're coming to New York.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so a couple of more. So there were some questions about skips. And so our presentations today are really around the developers that we've selected as part of this process. You'll see from the public announcement that that one of the skips that was selected, or the skip that was selected, is for blades in the cells that will be developed in the capital region of New York. We don't have a lot of information to be talking about that today, so we're going to stick with questions associated with the individual developers. But the additional investments that the developers that are speaking today will be making into the space are really up to them, and they're in the process of thinking about where do they need to make investments in order for their projects to materialize. So the agreements that we are developing between the developers in New York obligates them to a certain amount of economic development investment in New York. How those investments actually come to play, they submitted some plans associated with their bids, but the specifics around that are really theirs to work through. As you can tell from the presentations, this is very early stage for most of these projects. That's not to say they don't know a fair bit about their sites and haven't been in the communities, but they are really trying to gather the information they need from the stakeholders in the space to understand how people would like to see their projects advance and to inform how they actually build and design and build their projects and move through the permitting process. And so one of the questions that does come up that might be an interesting one for folks to speak to a little bit, and maybe we'll keep the same order, is there was a question about installation vessels and the thinking about whether installation vessels would be a barging operation or whether there were other plans. So just interested in, I know we all recognize the fact that the supply chain for offshore wind installations is a little bit challenged when it comes to installation vessels. So I think I'll ask the question a little more generally, which is how are each of you as developers thinking about the challenges associated with access to installation vessels in your project? And if you have any insights you can share now about how you see the installation going forward around your COD, that would be helpful as well. So maybe we'll start with, again, with the Attentive team.
Sure, thanks, Greg. To your point earlier, we were in a lot of early stages. And is one of those areas that we're perpetually trying to understand and see what the options are. We have a marine affairs manager that's been on board with us for several years, and building out that relationship with mariners and also the supply chain to see what's doable. And so, working with sponsors to identify what those supply chain opportunities are. We're looking at not only the supply chain in New York, but also how we can actually make this successful in standing up the project and the timeline that we've set out. So no particular context to any more details than that, but something that we're constantly looking at.
Thank you. And community?
Yep. Thanks, Greg, and thank you for the question. So I would say very similar. I mean, we definitely recognize there are a lot of projects that have very similar timelines, not just in the U.S., but globally. And so there are supply chain constraints in this period that require early investments, early planning, and that's something that we're very much looking at from this project's perspective, but also the strength of our shareholders. So some of the strategies around long-term charters of vessels, but really, we are continue to maintain an open view of what is available in the market and our timeline. We're engaging with all the suppliers, so we understand what is looking like it will become available, so that we can pick the best, most optimum installation methodology available at the time.
Thank you. And Vineyard?
Yes, very similar. It's very early stages for the project. We're focused on evaluating all of our options right now and engaging with suppliers as well, just trying to de-risk our schedule and deliverability of the project. So we don't have a choice yet made on whether we're using barges or wind turbines installation vessels yet.
All right, thank you very much. And so let's see, a couple other package questions which I think go around, and this time I'll start with community, so we're not picking on Attentive each time, and then we'll go community, Vineyard, and back to Attentive. But there are, in the vein of the supply chain, there is a lot of questions still about port development and port readiness for offshore wind, and I know that you were all thinking about this, but the question comes around to how are you thinking about ports and the use of ports in the development of your project, and in addition to that, thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act passed, I guess it was earlier this year. I get a little track, but the IRA and how the IRA will play into your project. So it's kind of a two-part question about ports and its readiness, and you're thinking about the IRA and your access to IRA funds associated with your project. So again, we'll start with community in this round, please.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So I'd say I'll start with the IRA. So I mean, I think what we're looking for as a project, as an industry, is just clarity and guidance, understanding the applicability of the specific IRA provisions on the bonuses as it relates to energy communities or domestic content, so that we have really practical examples that we can apply for our projects as we're designing our supply chain approach, the location of our assembly and marshaling facilities, as well as O&M, and the opportunities that those sorts of considerations have for the benefit of securing these tax credits. And then taking a step to the actual how we're thinking about ports. I mean, we need ports. We need ports to assemble the components to build the projects offshore, and for the purpose of long-term operations and maintenance. And we need them, or to say our project and the projects here very likely need them to be in New York. And so we are very much looking at the supply chain investment plan proposals. I know there's a second phase to the supply chain investment plan that will be upcoming, and we're actively monitoring that, but also looking at what ports have been under development to date, because it's really important that we utilize these assets that the industry is investing in to ensure the long-term viability and the long-term jobs stay in the ports we're investing in.
Thank you. And the Vineyard team?
Yeah, so we're still working and evaluating several ports in the New York City area. We're looking at the technical constraints, commercial considerations, and schedule availability, along with the other offshore wind projects in the area. On the IRA, we're looking to maximize our benefits, of course, where possible, as the OREC mechanism provides provisions to share the benefits with ratepayers. So we're looking at our domestic supply chain partnerships and searching for meaningful opportunities to invest in energy communities.
Back around to the Attentive team, please.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'll take this one. So For Attentive, we'll be using the Ravenswood Generating Station as the permanent operations and maintenance hub for the entire operations of the Attentive Energy One project. So we've already got the site for that. It's a site that's 27 acres. We have existing 120 person staff, 90% plus union on the site already working to maintain the Ravenswood station. Will be cross-training those folks to support the permanent operations and maintenance of Ravenswood and Attentive going forward. In addition to that, on the IRA front, there's been a lot of talk here, obviously, about skips and domestic content. There's another really important facet of the Inflation Reduction Act that's very helpful, and particularly in places like Ravenswood, and that's the Energy Communities ITC adder. The IRS has provided guidance that if you're interconnecting an offshore wind facility at a site that meets certain criteria for brownfields, which the Ravenswood site meets, then those facilities are eligible for a bonus ITC investment tax credit based on interconnecting and remediating those brownfields. And so because Attentive is able to interconnect at the Ravenswood site, it's able to earn a greater tax credit, and that's passed back to the ratepayers in the form of a lower overall OREC price. So the Inflation Reduction Act is in fact a key element, not just of supporting greater economic development, job creation, onshoring manufacturing for this important industry. It's also something that's able to save money for ratepayers in connection with cleaning up brownfield sites.
Great. Thank you, Clint. All right. One more that I think can go to all of you, and it's in regard to substations. So we get a lot of questions about this one, and I'd just like to have each of you take a chance with it. But we'll start with Vineyard for the last one here because there's a secondary question for them as well. So the question for all of you is going to be about substations and substation cooling, and you're thinking about the timeline for that and whether your cooling systems on substations will be once through or not. So anything you can share on substations and potential thermal discharge. But starting with Vineyard again, there's a number of questions about Vineyard and how they're going to engage with stakeholders on Long Island to deal with the cable fall and overland routes. So I just want to give you an opportunity to talk a little more about your thinking about how you will be engaging with stakeholders on Long Island to better understand their concerns and interests, and then follow up with just what your thinking is on substations. So starting with Vineyard.
Hi. So for the substation location, similar to our routing uncertainties right now, we have not yet decided on a substation location as approaching East Garden City. For the cooling, I can't really speak to that right now, but I'd be happy to follow up at a later date. And for the stakeholder engagement, I'm going to pass it over to Marlena because she's doing a lot of that work.
Marlena?
My apologies. I just had a little technical difficulty and I lost the question. Can you repeat, please?
A little more information around Vineyard's plans for stakeholder engagement on Long Island to understand the interest and concerns for cable routes.
So we are building partnerships that we have LOIs and MOUs with, including Workforce Development Institute, UPROS, which is in Brooklyn, and some other community organizations that we have been partnering and talking with. The one thing that we have been trying to combat a lot is misinformation. And we have been successful in getting into the communities and not only sponsoring, but actually getting engaged and getting to know them and practice active listening. And it has helped us a lot in getting actually a lot of young, I'm calling it the entrepreneurs of New York, that spirit of going, you know what, I want to actually get into this industry. And it's been helping because they go to in their households and then they educate their own multi-generational families, right? Some of the households are compounded like that. I built like that. So with that, we go back to our partners and stakeholders and explain, listen, there are some concerns about mental health about the health benefits. And we always start and we end with a message that there is no justice any type of justice without environmental justice. And how do we move from there? So that's how, we are tackling these issues. But more than that is we're mapping out a workforce development and hiring plan that takes that into consideration as a high priority for both, for us and our stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And quickly back to the attentive and community teams. Anything to add on the substation component? We're just about out of time.
Yeah, I can take it real quick, Greg. So for the Attentive project, the full substation will be located at the Ravenswood site. We've submitted details as part of our Article 7. I've put the case number in the chat for anyone who's interested in it. The substation itself will be cooled using infrastructure on the Ravenswood site. We do not currently plan to use once-through cooling for the onshore substation. Designs are still in process for the offshore substation.
All right, and community, one chance.
Yeah, I would just say, looking at the time, please reach out to our team. We can provide a detailed answer towards the question of the on or offshore converter cooling systems, which I believe are still under evaluation. And then as far as the siting of onshore infrastructure, I think that the key message here is it's early engagement's key. We need to include the voices of our stakeholders before we make any decisions or as we advance through permitting processes that we're inclusive. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And thank you to the rest of the presenters. Can you get the next slide, please? So real quick, if you were interested in the case number for the Attentive project, it's 22-T-0670. Again, that's 22-T-0670. And you can plug that into the DPS finder and pick it up. So real quick, we released an RFI earlier this fall to learn about our upcoming solicitation. All that information is being incorporated into our 4th OREC solicitation, which will be released later this week. And I just want to make everyone aware that we are planning to do an open house, series of open house events early in 2024. You can check back to our wind.ny.gov webpage for details around that. We'll provide an opportunity to meet with the NYSERDA staff, but also with our developers to ask them specifics about their project. Next slide, please. And finally, as always, if you have interest in some of these more technical topics, please tune into our Learning from the Expert webinars. We have more than 35 of them on our YouTube channel, and it's all kinds of topics that are presented by experts in the space. And as always, feel free to join our email list and get our latest alerts by signing up at offshorewind.ny.gov. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. Again, this webinar will be presented in entirety on our website later this week, and the standalone of the slide decks will likewise be available. Thank you very much and have a great day.